This is a nice, real short video, and I think I cracked the code on making the whole refrigeration process simple and easy to understand. I'm talking about the mechanical system, the refrigeration process. So let me go ahead and share my screen. This is actually part of a much larger presentation, but I'm only going to do like the first 14 slides, I think. This is really, really short. When we're talking about the refrigeration process, we're going to break this whole thing down into 4 simple components, okay? Number 1, we have the compressor, all right? Number 2, we have the condenser. Number 3, we have the expansion valve. And number 4, we have the evaporator. 4 simple things. You do have to memorize this, okay? I can't make it any easier than that. Gonna have to memorize that. Compressor, condenser, expansion valve, and evaporator, all right? Now, to make this a little simpler, we're going to associate each one of those with a different word. Like compressor, think of it as the pressure increaser, okay? The compressor is the pressure increaser. That's very simple, it makes sense to you, right? The condenser is the heat rejector. And as we go through this, I've got a schematic, we'll go through the entire refrigeration process and it'll make sense. But in the meantime, memorize this. Condenser is the heat rejector. The expansion valve is going to be the pressure dropper, the pressure reducer, okay? And finally, the evaporator is the heat absorber. Got it? 4 simple things: compressor, pressure increaser, the condenser, heat rejector, expansion valve, the pressure dropper, and the evaporator is the heat absorber. Now, in the refrigeration process, they use refrigerants. Sound familiar, right? The refrigerants, they're all designed, or they have characteristics that will make them change state at a very specific temperature, okay? In other words, they're going to change state from liquids to vapors, from vapors to liquids at specific temperatures. And most everything that you guys are probably going to encounter is R410A systems. You may run across some older systems that are R22, and that's a different subject. We're going to talk about the process for right now. All we're doing is taking this refrigerant with certain characteristics and continuously pressurize and depressurize that in order to manipulate the temperature. That's it. We're going to take the refrigeration process in this loop, continually pressurize it and depressurize it in order to manipulate the temperature. When we do that, the goal is to absorb heat or reject heat. That's it. Refrigerant going through a cycle, we pressurize it, depressurize it, absorb heat, reject heat. Simple. That's all this is. When you pressurize a refrigerant, you're going to increase its temperature, okay? When you do that, you're able to reject heat from it. So when you compress it, you raise the temperature, and you're able to reject heat from it, which is going to cause the refrigerant to change state. And we'll get to that in just a second. When you depressurize the refrigerant, you decrease the temperature, so that way it becomes, when the temperature drops, it can absorb heat. Okay, so the expansion valve is going to depressurize. I've already let the cat out of the bag. When you depressurize the refrigerant, you decrease the temperature, and therefore you're able to absorb heat. What the technical explanation for temperature is just increasing the molecular velocity, okay? The faster the molecules are moving, the more they rub, and hence the temperature increases. So we can manipulate the molecular velocity or the temperature by changing the volume. We change the volume by pressurizing or depressurizing, right? We have the pressure increaser and the pressure dropper. That's all we're going to do to this refrigerant in this cycle: increase the pressure, decrease the pressure, manipulating the temperature, which is the speed of the molecules. So we're going to go through this whole process real quick. The very first thing we have here is the compressor, or the pressure increaser. Awesome. You'll see here, hopefully you can see my cursor right here. The suction line is cold, right? We're familiar with that. That's why it's insulated. It's like taking a beer can outside with a Huggy. It's cold, so it's insulated. the compressor sucks in refrigerant from the suction line. Makes sense, right? The compressor sucks in refrigerant from the suction line, compresses it, and it's discharged through the discharge line at a higher temperature, higher as we increase the pressure, right? So I love this little schematic here. You see on the left picture that piston is sucking in refrigerant from the suction side. The piston on the right picture, it starts to compress the refrigerant. Therefore, you're reducing the volume. You're increasing the temperature because you're increasing that molecular velocity, right? Pretty simple. Sucks in cold, compresses, pushes out hot. Very simple, right? When when the compressor sucks in low temperature, low pressure vapor, compresses it, it increases the temperature, but it's still a vapor. Okay, so it comes out of the compressor through the discharge line as a high temperature gas. It comes out of that and it goes into the condenser, or what we refer to as the heat rejector, because that hot vapor goes into all those coils. And I'm talking about the coils in the condensing unit outside, right? All the fins, there's copper coils with all those fins. The fan pulls in relatively cooler air, whatever it is outside, 80, 85, 90, 95, whatever it is, pulls the cooler air in, rejects the heat out the top. That's why when you put your hand over the condensing unit, you feel hot air, because that's what it's supposed to do. When you pull cooler air over that hot vapor, now it causes the refrigerant to change state. It hits that certain temperature, and now it's going to condense from a vapor into a liquid. Hence the term condenser or condensing unit. Right now all this stuff's really making sense. Suction line, condensing unit. The air goes across that coil, drops the temperature, heat's rejected out the top, and it's compressed into a high temperature, high pressure liquid. So we see it come out the bottom here, and it heads, as it goes through that the condensing unit. Remember, it comes in as the vapor, fan blows over it, and it has that change of state inside all those coils. So now it moves as a high temperature, high pressure liquid, comes over to the expansion valve. The expansion valve is going to increase the volume, decrease the pressure, and when you do that, when you decrease the pressure, you decrease the temperature. Make sense? So it's going to come into this expansion valve right here, and I'll show you a close up here. Remember, we call the expansion valve the pressure dropper, right? So as it comes in the bottom of the valve, it's a high temperature, high pressure liquid. It expands, right? And it comes out right here as a low pressure, low temperature liquid, where it is going to head up into the evaporator coil next. And you're going to see it change state. It's changing state right here from a liquid vapor, a vapor that's changing, or I mean a liquid changing into a vapor. This depicts that whole process much better. Comes out as mostly liquid, not pure liquid, and converts into that vapor again as it goes through the coil. One thing, while I'm thinking of it, you look at here, these the temperature probes. When you're looking inside the unit, you want to make sure that those are actually secured. If they're not, the whole process doesn't work right. So now it's expanding and it's going through all those coils again. Kind of like the coils on the outside, these are the inside coils, and it's having that change of state. It's dropping the temperature. So the refrigerant is now very cold. Again, we have a fan that pulls in relatively warmer air. The interior environment is usually somewhere around 75, passes over the evaporator coil with very cold refrigerant, so you get cold air as a result. It's absorbing heat out of the air. Remember, it's cold, so it absorbs heat out of the air, cooler air comes out, which is why we take our supply temperature and return temperature, right? 75-ish coming in, 55-ish going out. That's why we call it the heat absorber. The evaporator is the heat absorber. It then pushes out that back through the suction line. It's now a low temperature, low pressure gas, where it has to go back to the compressor and start the whole process over again. If the refrigerant doesn't change state at the right place at the right temperature, then the whole thing doesn't work right. And you can actually, like, if you don't have a full change of state inside the evaporator here, and you're sending back some liquid back to the compressor, you can flood that compressor and cause damage, because the compressor is not going to compress liquid. The compressor compresses the vapor, and that whole process starts over again. So that's it. It's very simple. We take a refrigerant, we continuously pressurize it and depressurize it in order to manipulate the temperature where we can extract heat or reject heat, and it just keeps doing that over and over again. So very, very simple. That's why we want to take an infrared image of your line set to make sure the fat suction line is cold and the smaller liquid line is hot. And you'll start to get used to what's normal. They're going to vary a little bit depending on the weather and the interior temps and that kind of thing. But they'll be fairly consistent, and they have to be. When they're not consistent, that change of state doesn't happen at the right place at the right time, at the right temperatures, and the refrigeration process just doesn't work correctly. That's it. So good luck. Feel free to continue to watch this, and the more you watch it, the more it'll start to sink in. But it's not that tough.